All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
designers,
and performers. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Volta Percussion. We are on episode 6, and I am joined by Mr. Ryan Reed, Mr. Robert Dickens Jr., and Mr. John Gaal. So we got some stuff to talk about. You haven't seen us in a few, so we're glad to be back here. John, you got a teaching tip for us today, right?
Yes, sir. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in. My teaching tip for today is, as educators, make sure you are in tune with your students' stress level. It's coming down to the end of the semester for many of us. Thanksgiving break should be right around the corner if it has not passed already, with winter break coming up pretty soon. In either case, tests, end of the semester, exams are coming up. Probably for students at the college level, barriers are coming up, right? And so it can be a very stressful time. In addition to the regular school stress and maybe winter concerts, or if you have district or region or all-state auditions coming up, with the whole pandemic situation, that has also caused anxiety. There's been some scientific research, and I can't quote stuff off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. But I did see this when I was waiting. Saw this on the television, commercial, how anxiety is building up in our teens. It's up, I think, 69% this year. But I'm saying that all to say is, as educators, yes, we have an end goal of we want our students to succeed in music and be better people and do great things. But make sure you're in tune with your students on a personal, case-by-case, individual basis. I have the privilege of being able to teach lessons privately on the side from my full-time band director gig. And so just being able to build those relationships and talk with those one-on-one students has really opened up my mind to, like, these students in today's society are super stressed and super anxious about the future. So just make sure you're checking in from time to time and not always thinking we got to get this music learned because we have this coming up. Take some time for some self-care, self-help, and check in with your students to make sure everything's good with them as well. Because, sorry, I'm going to say one more thing, because you may learn that maybe the best thing for that rehearsal, for that day or that night, is not cram it down their throats on practicing, etc., etc. It's just, okay, we need to have a little bit more of a relaxed rehearsal. We need to talk about some things. Maybe we just don't push as hard tonight. So check in with your students, check in with your friends, and make sure you're taking care of each other's.
That's a great point, John. I'm actually thinking about that right now. It's our last rehearsal week before we go into fall break. So that's putting that in the front of my mind for this week is great. We got 3 rehearsals this week, so that's a good point. All right. So we're talking about specialization when it comes to percussion education. Got some hot takes on this, but also we want to just open up a nice friendly discourse. I don't want to say discussion because I expect there will be some discourse in this about some pros and cons when it comes to specialization, specifically speaking, like when we're just introducing our students. So John posed this question to our group a while back, and Rob felt very strongly about one opinion, and I'll say opinion because maybe we can sway and find a middle ground, but he brought up some interesting things, and I'd love to hear from Rob. Why don't you kind of bring us into, like, what you think about this, just kind of starting us out.
Personally, I think there's a lot. Obviously, I feel like from an educator standpoint, the answer should always be students should be the best musicians that they can possibly be. And some people, I would assume non-percussionists as well, feel like there are certain percussion instruments that are deemed more musical than others, so they should have more of a preference. And I say this primarily from dealing with, I mean, let's just be honest, the majority of band directors are not percussionists. So what I get, and this is just the general vibe that I get from a lot of those percussionists, or from those band directors, is that they want their kids to be more proficient at keyboard rather than just being a kid that can play notes and rhythms and play snare drum, timpani, whatever, etc. And I have a lot of different middle school directors, other people that have different approaches. Do you introduce all of those things at the same time? Do you start kids out on pads? That would be my preference, because if your hands are bad at coordinating, it doesn't matter if you know B flat from B natural. That's my particular preference on that. But I think a lot of that is, like I said, there's two roads. Like, do you teach them how to play snare drum first? Which, let's be honest, if we're talking middle school and kids are joining percussion, why did they join? They've never seen a xylophone before, probably. They've never seen bells. They've never seen vibraphone. I want to hit a drum. This is why I joined percussion, because I thought I would be playing drums. I cannot tell you how many sixth graders that their band director wanted me to teach them bells for an entire year that have said that to me verbatim. Mr. Dickens, when are we going to play the drums? When are we going to play the drums? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to hear you guys, your take on which you would start with and why. Because in most instances, there's one school that I can think of that I think it may be like fifth grade that they only play keyboard for an entire year and then they start playing other stuff. They're amazing. So that's their own process. But I wonder, how do you think is the best way to tackle it? Because in most of the schools that I've seen, that I've dealt with personally, that they only play bells for sixth grade, and then seventh grade, they get to play snare drum and all this other kind of stuff. Those kids are not good at keyboard. And they all hate keyboard later, too. Because they're just like, well, snare drum's the holy grail. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't have any problem with specialization, but I feel like part of the issue is from the way that we're starting kids playing all these different instruments. So, what's you guys' take on, like, which one you should start first, or you prefer to start first? Would you introduce all of them at the same time? Like, what's your process on that?
Let's hear from Ryan.
So I start my students on bells, with the explanation of everything that we're gonna do on bells is gonna transfer over to, so like the technique that we learn is gonna transfer over to snare drum. The wrist motion, like everything, the wrist motion, all of that stuff is gonna transfer over, minus the different notes. So you're going to learn the technique on a mallet instrument that you're going to apply to drums, and you're going to learn the rhythm side of things that you're going to learn, that you're going to apply to drums on mallets, and get them to understand early on that all of those things are connected. So one, it's not just bells or just timpani or just snare drum or just toys, or, just sit in the back of the classroom and hold a triangle and do nothing. But like all of those things, I'm joking about that part. But all of those things are interconnected. So they all apply and facilitate growth in the other ones. And I think it's when we don't explain that to kids that we see what happens early on when you start every kid on bells and they're like, well, bells suck. I just want to hit drums. Well, you kind of are when you're learning the bells. You're just not hitting something that's as loud or as, whatever. Like it's just a different thing, but you're learning a lot of the same skills.
Mm. I like the
And I think
conversation of interconnected. Go ahead, Ryan.
well, I think part of the reason why kids hate bells in middle school is too that they get ignored. If I can be very frank, they're in the back of the room. All their music doubles the flute part, so it's like when the flutes play, the bells can play, but they're not getting any information. And sometimes, and I was guilty of this when I did my student teaching. Sometimes if I need to work with the flutes, I don't want the bells to play, and then I forget that they have the same part and that kind of stuff. So it's almost, we got to be better as not percussion educators, just as music educators, to remember that there are other people in the room. And I'm not saying that just for a percussion side of things, but just to always remember that there are other people in the room when you're rehearsing and that they need your information too. And your young percussionist especially need your information because they don't touch their instrument. Like flutes, clarinets, like your fingers are on it and it's very tactile and you can see it and you can feel it. We're the only instrument where it's like you don't touch what you're playing. Like our lips aren't on the instrument. We have an object that we hit it with between. I hope your lips are not on the instrument.
It's kind of gross.
But we have an object. We have a barrier, so we don't feel that.
Right.
So they especially need your information there.
John, what's your thought process? I know what mine is. I want to hear what yours is, John.
Well, you bring up a good point, Ryan, and I haven't really thought about it because I have never seen or heard of anyone starting their kids on bells first or mallets in general first. Um, and when I posed the question to you all this past week, my perspective wasn't coming from sixth grade, seventh, eighth graders. It was coming from like a high school uh, teaching moment. So hopefully we can talk about that a little bit later. So pedaling back to
Mm-hmm.
just starting students out, I personally start them out on snare first for the first 6 weeks, and then after the first 6 weeks, I continue with the snare, but then I introduce mallets. Now, during those first 6 weeks, I am throwing in from time to time note reading, the musical alphabet, uh, things like that, so that when I do put mallets in the kids' hands after the second 6 weeks, they already have a decent foundation of understanding rhythms from the snare drum, specifically quarter notes and a few eighth notes. They understand stickings, and they should already know their note names from all those lessons I've already taught them the first 6 weeks. So at that point, it's getting them comfortable moving around a bigger instrument, hitting multiple surfaces, and reading music. Which, so far, uh, now, again, from my perspective, since I don't currently teach any middle schoolers, all my kids are coming from middle school to high school, even though I do have classes of beginners who have no musical background, including middle school. I would still go with that approach. I am finding that when you introduce keyboard, no matter how much foundational music reading exercises you've given them, there's always a big drop off of comprehension once a kid gets behind a keyboard. And I think it's because of the size and because not only are they now having to read the music rhythmically, which you should have been building upon that with snare, but now they have to also comprehend the note name, the letter, and then finally the biggest thing for them is where is it on the keyboard? Where is it on the keyboard? And I know there are
Mm-hmm.
some apps that I use to challenge students to do their note namings which they have to look at a keyboard and play the game, etc. But I think that last part of associating that note with the keyboard and not looking down, right? That's the biggest hurdle. So when Ryan said that he starts his kids off on keyboards, I'm now thinking of all the possibilities of, okay, if I start my kids off on keyboards, because on snare drum you're going from one surface and then you go to keyboard that has so many more surfaces. Should we go snare, then timpani, which has some additional surfaces, and then keyboard? So we're going from, we're increasing the amount of surfaces. Or should we go flip flop and go tons of surfaces and just play, just learn your different notes, hit those notes multiple times so they associate the note with what is on the keyboard, and then go to snare? But and since you said this, Ryan, I'm having all these counter arguments in my head now. And E, you're probably going to say all these as well, so I'll shut up very soon. But the counter argument, if you go keyboard then snare, is that the technical part of snare, I say, is more than keyboard, especially two-mount keyboard playing. Because not only do you have your rebound strokes, downstrokes, taps, etc., the four basic strokes for snare, but you also have your doubles, and then you have your flams and your accents, right? You don't have to do that primarily with keyboard. And at that point, it just takes time to get the finger dexterity for doubles and to just understand that two-height motion of the wrist. So then I can see why people would go snare first, then keyboard. So I didn't give you really an answer of my opinion. I told you my approach, and now I've also told
Very
you how I
political.
can see both ways. But I will not choose a specific one for middle school right now, because my main concern is high school specialization going, and we'll talk about that later. But E, what is your opinion on the matter?
Um, I've only taught middle school a couple times. I haven't done it in a long time. I started everybody on a one surface drum pad, to be honest.
So snare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for a lot of the reasons that you cited is that there's so much introduction of the technical aspect that I think it is transferable, but kind of to your point, because there's so much farther for them to go with the technical side, um for like the immediacy of what's going to be asked for them once they get into high school, I think that's where my mind went to start them on that path first. Because it's like, I was thinking, okay, as soon as they get into the high school gate, a high school instructor, because this middle school I was teaching at wasn't feeding into the high school program that I taught. It was feeding into another part of the county. And I'm like, the first thing that they're going to want is they're going to want to start separating out who's going into my battery sections, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, if they don't have those foundations, because I inherited that middle school, so in my percussion class, I had a mix of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So ideally, I was like, okay, well, I need to make sure that the 8th graders are moving in this direction here, for what's going to be expected of them as soon as they come out the gate. And I hate that it's like that, but it is. You know what I mean? Like, I wish that I could have started them with mallet percussion, knowing that they're going to go into high school as a superstar mallet percussion, and that's where they want. But knowing the programs that I was serving in the area, I knew that all of those programs are going to set their battery first, and then they're going to focus on how to build keyboard players out of the remainder of the students that don't have the drive to push through for the battery instruments. So that's where I set them up first. But then also, like, it was easier and less distracting for them to start on, to start rhythmic training on one surface. You know what I mean? Because I'll be honest, I was working at, it was called a mega middle school, which was like a middle school on a high school plot that had like 1,200 kids there. And so, like, part of it was every day trying to keep them from like breaking out into a fight or something crazy like that. So literally, I had to do whatever I could do to keep them focused, and it was easier for me to keep them focused on one surface in rhythmic training. And then we started doing pass offs immediately. It was like week 2. We were like, okay, we learned this and this. We're starting pass offs right off the bat, to kind of keep them engaged all the way through the semester. I'm just thinking back to the stress of that. I don't ever want to do that again. So God bless you all still teaching middle school. I never want to do it again ever. Like I feel where my bar is now, and it's right at about 8th and a half grade, which is like second semester 8th graders. If I ever start teaching lessons again, but I do not want to go back to middle school ever again. Just, shout out to all the percussion educators out there teaching middle school. Y'all are awesome. I really respect y'all.
I
think
want to know
lessons,
somebody that's
though.
really good at it.
Oh, what?
Yeah,
Rob?
I mean, lessons are different, but Go
No,
ahead,
I
Rob.
was saying I really would like to find someone that likes teaching middle school percussion and kind of get their ideas, because I heavily struggle with that. I would agree with you, E. I'm like my bar of teaching kids things is about that 8th grade, second semester of 8th grade year. Like going all the way back is very difficult for me.
And this is what I found in the lessons that I was teaching, right? Like 6 and 7-year-olds, great. They're at the right cognitive level to where they hang on every word. Their attention span isn't very great, but they're at the right cognitive level to where they still hang on every word, and it's very easy to wow them. Once you got an 11 or a 12-year-old, it's like nothing impresses them. They don't care what you're
Nope.
doing. It's like their attention span is not there. So it's like you can't wow them. You don't have their attention span. It's literally like trying to talk to a brick wall and getting it to understand what you're trying to say. And that's why I say it's like, I love teaching 6, 7-year-olds, because when I was doing lessons, like I was teaching like young kids, like elementary school kids, and trying to introducing them to the process. But then once you got to that middle school range, it was very stressful. And then 8th graders are just like, they got foundations for everything. You're now just trying to step them up to the next level into high school, and then, go upper levels and stuff like that. So I almost feel like, and this is just my thing, I really like Ryan's process. And just to round us back into our topic about specialization, I almost feel like there is something to be said about getting kids starting in a foundation earlier than middle school, like, 4th or 5th grade, where they're either starting with piano or they're starting with just basic rhythmic studies. Whether it's like the way I started my daughter's 7 now. She's in piano, but I started her 2 years ago with just basic rhythmic studies, which is a foot tap and a single pad, which is just, this is a quarter note, but this is starts with just quarter notes and tapping your foot. Okay, here is how an 8th note breaks away from your quarter note. Okay, here is how a 16th note breaks away from your quarter note. And I just started her real slow at like 60 beats a minute and just had her go down a listing of rhythms until she could pick the tempo up 4 clicks at a time. And for her, it worked and allowed her to transition into piano seamlessly because she wasn't afraid of the foot pedals, because she had been tapping her foot already. And all we did was transition what she was doing with 2 hands to her fingers. So now, like, she is really liking the process of piano. And my goal, and I hope she sticks with piano, is to transition her from piano to keyboard mallets or piano to drum set. She's starting to really she's really liking the piano, and she's starting to get interested in my drum set, even though she doesn't want to dedicate time to doing it because she's still in her whole taekwondo thing too, which is lovely. It's more limb coordination, which I think is going to be great getting her in the drum set. But I really would like to start working with her on, multiple mallet techniques, so that by the time she hits middle school, she's been introduced to everything. So that I feel like my only goal with her right now is to not get her onto a wind instrument. Like, and I know that that's selfish because I know, like, I have no issue with wind instruments. I was a saxophone player for 7 years, but at the same time, I feel like if I introduce her to enough percussive elements, she will not, she won't go down that route when she goes to her first band day and they have all these instruments and she's like, I want to play the clarinet. I'm going to be like, damn, reeds are expensive. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to be so upset because we've already got a piano in the house. We've already got a drum set in the house. I've got every implement that I need to, like, take her down that route. Like, if she decides, God forbid, she wants to play another instrument, that's just another instrument I'm going to have to get in my house, and I don't want to. So that's just me being selfish, but she is really digging piano, which, to John's point, and I know it's, big part of John's foundation was how early he started piano. I like that she's getting that foundation, and it's teaching her everything that she needs to know to be a great keyboard player, which is she's learning both for her clefs. She's learning note reading. She's learning how to work with the metronome, and like all that stuff is great. And I'm just like, man, she's going to be great if she sticks with it. Or she may decide to quit and go back to dance, which would be great too. I don't have an issue with dance. I'm going to say this out loud, and I hate saying it, but, it's reality. As long as she ain't a cheerleader, it's fine. Color guard is cool. That cheerleading is okay. Maybe a gymnast. I don't know. Whatever she wants to do. It's cool. I don't want to be crucified on this thing for talking about what my daughter's gonna do. She's gonna do whatever she wants to do, and I'm gonna support it because I love her. So
Right.
So I have something to add in based off what you guys have kind of talked about, and the keyboard thing is because that's how I start my beginners. I think you guys bring up a good point. When we get to 8th grade, I do switch to more like pad focus because and the reason, again, why I start like beginners on bells is look at what they're asked to do. Turn your wrist. Play a single stroke. A flam is just a high single stroke and a low single stroke that move at the same time. So teaching that kind of, like, you're working on very basic skills, which you can go up a B flat major scale and go 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 3, and 4, and up and down the B flat major scale and work on all those things. But you do bring up a good point when they're starting to get to more advanced skills, introducing those through the drum pad. Like John was talking about finger mechanics and that kind of stuff, because those are very related skills, which is why, like, if we're talking about specialization, why I am not a fan of specialization is because if you take a 4-mallet lateral stroke, the equivalent of a lateral stroke, and we've had this discussion before, the equivalent of a lateral stroke is a diddle, where you have one motion and then 2 notes come out of that motion if you play a lateral to the letter of what it actually is. You, like, on a single stroke, and if it weren't 10:30 at night, I would be drumming in my apartment right now, but I'm also trying not to get evicted. But you drop the stick and you play the second note with the finger dexterity, like John was talking about. You add that finger support. You know, some people teach here, some people teach here, whatever, but you use the finger to help with that second note. In the lateral stroke, it's the same idea where you drop the first note and torque the second note over. So it's 2 small motions in 1 large motion. The easiest way to do that is on a drumstick. Just push, pull, push, pull. Super slow, push, pull. And then equate that to drop, flick, drop, flick, drop, flick. And I have found, and we started doing this at Matrix, during the COVID year, but even before then, the kids that drum better are better technical 4-mallet players. Now take like scales knowledge, note accuracy, all that out of the way. But like pure ability, the kids that play drums better play technical mallet stuff better. Now, on the flip side of that, I feel like the kids that play mallets better, at least in my experience, phrase better on a snare drum especially a concert snare drum, because they're not thinking like heights. They're thinking musically where it wants to go, which is why, you know, I have terrible sense of pitch, but I will sing stuff while I play, and I encourage my kids to sing stuff while I play, because wind instruments have the advantage of they phrase based on their air. So when they hold a long note, they finish a note based on how their air finishes. Well, I can just do this all day. I can never stop my roll if I just wave my hands back and forth all day. But if I sing along with it, I know where that note is going to envelope out. But if I'm just thinking purely in how my hands move, that roll just goes, and then stops. Well, there's no musical significance to just stopping a roll. You've got to envelope that roll to make a musical statement, you know, which happens through understanding how phrasing works, understanding how your voice works, whether you're a good singer or not. Like, again, I sing a lot when I'm playing through things to know how I want to shape things. So I think that's where, for me, like, I don't care if a kid wants to focus on snare drum more, or focus on keyboard more, but to me, the term specialization is like only doing this. And I think that handicaps us so hard. Like, I think snare drummers make better percussionists, and keyboard players make less good percussionists, but have more inherent musical intuition, I guess, because they're doing pitches more often. They're being exposed to like direction and pitch and that kind of stuff. But I think without the other is half of a circle. It's not the whole picture for what we're trying to do as a musician. So that's my 2 cents on specialization, and moving over again once you get to 8th grade to introducing skills for one instrument on another instrument.
I think going to what you just said, Ryan, how you define specialization, I would define it slightly differently. And I would take the approach of specialization is you have a general knowledge in percussion specifically, you have a general knowledge of percussion instruments, but you focus, I would use the word primarily on one. You could think like asset class if we're thinking financials, right? So timpani, keyboard, snare. Then you can start doing drum set and other stuff. So when I think specialization, I think they know how to do those fundamental skills on all those instruments, but their focus is on keyboard. That's how I would view the definition of specialization. But I think we also need to approach it from the timetable of, are we talking specialization from middle school, high school, college, and beyond? Going back to Rob's point, his main focus for this question tonight was, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but you were talking about with the emphasis on beginning percussion in the middle school realm.
Yes.
Would we, everyone on here, say we've kind of talked about the middle school realm? Can we start moving to the high school realm? And does that area of specialization change as you move to the high school realm? Or does your conviction still stay the same as it was in the middle school realm?
For me, it definitely would change. I feel like in a perfect scenario, the majority of the well-roundedness would come from being in middle school, possibly your first year in high school, to where you are what I would consider at least proficient in snare drum, keyboard, and timpani. Meaning you get on the instrument, you know technically how to play those things, and you can actually do that with some semblance of other musicians seeing that this is a person that understands this instrument, like they're comfortable in this. So that once you do get to that back half of 9th grade or 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, you can study a little bit more like a percussion studio, and you can start to specialize. But again, like Ryan said before, because all those things inform each other, I think that it's important to have those things at the beginning. but I don't think that it should be looked at as a negative things for students to naturally start to gravitate towards certain things because they already have a background in other stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's no way for it to be equal. Like there's absolutely no way that any person is going to be equally as good at timpani as they are at this, as they are that. Like you have some natural ability that may lead you towards other things over others. You know what I mean? Like for me, I started out playing drums first, and then I started out playing organ. So I had a music theory background and all of that kind of thing, but I didn't play a marimba at home. You know what I mean? And I got into band later. So my just regular technical ability of understanding what the scales are and understanding what was being played was pretty good, but knowing my way around the keyboard and physically how to do that from a technique standpoint is not as good as me being on a one surface and being on a snare drum. You know what I mean? So I think that, again, I feel like the general part of it should come at the first part of your education. But as you get to high school, I think it should be okay for students to pursue one particular skill set and start to max that out, because there's no person that, again, is equally as good at all of these three things. And then also, that's not required of any other instrument in band. Like no other saxophonist is like, you have to be just as good at bari sax as you are at alto sax, as you are at tenor sax, or, you know, all these instruments that maybe have similar fingering, similar valves. They're not required to be just as good at all of those things. But I feel like sometimes I see some educators that have that expectation of percussionists that you should be just as good at all three of these things as you are at any of them. Now, you should be proficient. I agree. Yes, you should be proficient. You should be able to get on that instrument and be competent. But Elanders, even if you practice forever and ever, will not be as good of a keyboard player as John Gaal. He ain't going to play no green at 200. It's just not going to happen. He can play singles that fast. He absolutely can play singles that fast, but he's not going to play green at 200. It's not going to happen.
You're absolutely correct in everything that you just said, Rob, from a perspective of it's not required from the other instruments. It's almost like celebrated if you do want to do it because you're, breaking out of the pack. Like I can recall back in high school when I first got in a jazz band as an alto player and opted to play bari sax. It was like, oh, cool. You want to play bari. You want to learn something different. Good for you. It's very similar to the alto, so you'll have no trouble, but your air support's going to have to be better. And going back to alto from playing bari was easy because bari took a lot of air. To like get the low notes out, it took a lot of air, and it was just heavy. But like you're right, like tenor saxes that came in, it was sometimes a struggle because if you didn't have enough tenor saxes, you had to convince a kid to switch from an alto to a tenor. You know what I mean? But same thing, like there are multiple flutes you could play. There are definitely multiple clarinets, but those kids that started on clarinet saying, oh, for a concert season, we want you to play a bass clarinet or we want you to play an alto clarinet. You know what I mean? Like to change from the norm, but there is definitely an expectation for percussionists to have this well-rounded knowledge of everything and to be proficient in more than one instrument. Which, to that point, it's like, okay, well, in what scenario would I need to be proficient in more than one instrument? Well, let's say you get contracted with the symphony if you're a music performance major, But
that's college. That's a different age group than high school.
It is a different age group than high school, but at the same time, are we not preparing our students for
that's the
level?
new conversation. That's the new conversation.
There we go.
What is the next level for us? Because let's be
Yep.
honest, the majority of us are never going to be in that situation. We are preparing kids for situations that they'll never be in. To me, it's okay if this kid can read bell parts, he can play the timpani, He can get by on some concert snare drum stuff, but this kid wants to march quads. Fine. You're proficient in the other things. You understand them. Spend your time being a great quad player. There's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like if we're trying so hard to make every kid just as good on all three of these particular things, we're wasting our time because most kids are not going to be music majors and they're never going to get an audition for a symphony orchestra because some 60-year-old dude is sitting in that spot and is going to play that part forever and ever and ever until his hands fall off. And then when his hands fall off, he's going to call some 50-year-old dude that's been sitting there waiting for a call. You know what I mean? That's never going to happen, even though we put that scenario to students.
So you believe in specializing?
I do. Under the guise that students have a base level of percussion competency. I'm not saying that kids should just, from 6th grade to whenever, I decided that I wanted to be Sean Vega the first time I walked into middle school percussion, and all I'm playing is quads. I'm going to set the timpani up that way. If you can't give me that, that's what I'm doing. I'm sorry. I'm done. No sweeps on timpani. Cool. I'm taking lessons. I'm through. Like, no.
I refuse to do anything else. It's all quads all day.
No
That's
sweeps
it.
on timpani.
I'm like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I mean, but hey, at the same time, past a certain extent of you being able to do it, what's the problem? It's not hurting the kid.
I think you bring up two different types of kids, though, at that point. The marching band kid and the kid that wants to do like concert band, concert percussion type things. You know, for a kid that like their goal is to make marching snare drum or the quad line or whatever, like, yeah, you kind of got to specialize in that. Like you said, have a level of competency and then specialize in that. To E's point earlier, what gig is playing quads going to get you after high school or after college? But also to E's point, what percussion instrument is going to get you a 6-figure paying gig in a symphony orchestra? It is not, kids listening at home, front ensemble kids listening at home, it is not the marimba or the xylophone or the vibraphone. It is having a really good concert snare drum roll or tuning on your timpani. So at that point, do we then open up the question of, well, why teach keyboards at all? If the six figure contracts
on xylophone.
See,
but here's the thing: Porgy and Bess is just single strokes and double strokes.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that matters is Porgy and Bess. So that's the only thing everyone should practice on xylophone.
So, but if you got 6 figures to play concert snare drum in, you know, the Dallas Orchestra or the Cleveland Orchestra, you can't tell me that you can't learn to go and play Porgy and Bess. Like for $100,000+ anybody can learn to play Porgy and Bess.
Damn right. Everybody can learn how to right.
But I mean, my next question is this though. Let's be real. Trying to get a job, one of these symphony orchestra jobs, as much as we're telling these kids this is really almost like telling a kid that they got a shot at being in the NBA. Like, you got a longer shelf life of trying to get there. You know what I mean? Like, there's a longer shelf life of, okay, you could try longer than you would the NBA. But it's still a very limited number of spots that are available. So it's like, if that kid wants to go for that, yes. But I mean, my thing is, what is the guys that we're setting this up under that kids need to be so well-rounded, those that go, you know, kind of overboard with it being well-rounded. What is the guys that we're setting that up under?
See, and I hear what you're saying, Rob, but I'm still thinking about the fact of getting everyone to the competency level is a struggle enough that sometimes it takes all 4 years of high school to get them to the competency level that will get them a scholarship in college. and that's where my mindset was always behind when I built curriculums for the high school, is that I need them to have a competency level to where if they want to apply for a scholarship, they're going to have no issue getting that scholarship just to be a member of the program, even if they're not a music major, right? Because to be honest, even the worst college programs for some reason have elaborate audition, expectations,
They do.
even when you get into the program and you're like, God,
Really?
like I did more than this in high. Yes. I've seen like I've seen college programs that like studio's not well known for anything, but then like a student will bring me the audition requirements and I'm like, what?
Wait,
Like,
so what you're talking about for them to not be a music major, but to participate in the studio?
yeah.
Oh, see, I've had the different perspective of with TCU. You don't have to be a music major. You don't have to be in the studio. You don't even have to go to the school, but you have to audition to be a part of the band. And by being in the band, you can get paid to do that.
Well, see, but that's dependent upon whether the school has a marching program, right? Because if it doesn't have a marching program, you may still want to play in college, but it doesn't mean you want to be a music major. You know what I mean? So ideally, when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about my students to where, okay, if they're, obviously any kid that I'm training from freshman to senior is going to be able to make it into a college marching organization. I don't have any worries that they're going to be able to make it into our basic. By the time they're ending their sophomore year, they should be able to make it into a college program, unless we're talking like the JSUs and the North Texases of the world, which is, it's far and
Right.
few in between, right? But most other college organizations, they're going to make it in some capacity. I'm more speaking to the fact that, okay, let's say they go to a smaller college that doesn't have a marching organization. What are their expectation and requirements for auditions? Because most of them are going to have you play at least 1 to 2 things, whether it's this concert snare piece, a timpani piece, or some kind of mallet percussion instrument. Can they do that successfully, get their change, get their money, and go on with what they want to go on? Like, I'm thinking about it from that perspective. And if I'm only teaching them the marching gig, but they want to end up going to school, I don't want them now looking at audition requirements and saying, you never taught me this. You never gave me this information. And I'm like, well, like I can't not answer that question for them. So I have to make sure that they at least have this competency level of information. And then if I have kids that have reached that pinnacle, but still want to do the upper levels of like the marching gig, whether it's, then that's where private lessons kind of come into play. But I feel like the curriculum to every other curriculum that's set up in the high school realm, which is algebra 2, trig, English 1, English 2, English 3, English 4, which still don't know why we're learning English in high school and college, which is just weird. Like most people speak well enough English by, their freshman year to where they don't really need more. But, history,
You're right.
like we keep going up these different levels to try to prepare these students for these different academic subjects. But yet in music, for some reason, there's always this Morpheus, your opinion of what you want it to be to get them to the next level, but never really like a standardized, this is what you need to get you here. And then from there, anything else that you want to do needs to be extracurricular, meaning private lessons, self-study, etc., etc. Excuse me. So it's all like, I feel like music education is always so subjective at the high school level. And then when you get into college, it's like, this is what you need. But like with every other academic subject in high school, there's already a track set up that's going to take them into college. And then you can just stop doing it when you get into college if you don't want to. If you're not going to need the math, you don't really have to take any math in college. If you don't need the science, you don't have to take any science in college. I didn't take a damn history course. Sorry for my language. I didn't take any history courses in college because I didn't need it. I wasn't going to be a history major. There was no history that was required of me. I didn't do it. I didn't have to. You know what I mean? I had to take like a year of science or something like that. But even for my, what do they call them? What are the extra courses in college called? I'm drawing a blank.
Independent study.
Extracurricular
Yeah.
activities.
is it called extracurriculars?
Independent study.
Yeah, something like that. But
Electives.
Extracurricular activities.
Electives.
yeah, electives. There you go. Thank you, Ryan.
Electives.
Electives. Yeah, that's the word, and I couldn't think of it. But yeah, even for my electives, I didn't have to take any like histories or anything like that, and I only had minimal requirements. Like I had to take more math because I was a business major. I had to take more math, and then I had to take like all the esoteric stuff like ethics and marketing and
Don't need that.
all that jazz. You know what I mean?
Ethics, I mean.
But I feel like for music education though, especially when we get into the high school realm, and I'm just speaking to high school, like the way I treat specialization is if you want to specialize, it's kind of got to be on your own time with how music education is set up. You can't do it with the program because if you do it with the program, they might be missing out on something that's going to prepare them for the next level. And I hate it that it's like that, but it's just like music education really hasn't evolved in the high school realm that puts us to that place. And people may tell me that you don't know what you're talking about. Music education has evolved. Okay, cool. All right. Well, then the question that I ask you all, because we were talking about specialization and how, if we want a kid to do this. So what do we say to the match grip groups out there that want this, singularity of information that translates from one to the other, and then they say, well, if you want to learn traditional, it needs to be on your own time, right?
Based on the argument that you just gave, I feel like they're well within their rights to do that, because outside of their preparing their students to make a collegiate marching ensemble, they are well within their pedagogy to decide to play match grip. You know what I mean? Because, the only groups that they're not going to be able to get into playing match grip, let's be honest, are independent percussion ensembles and drum corps. Those are the only two ensembles that they will not be able to make it into. But I would also say that the students that I've seen, or at least at those match grip schools, they are so technically proficient on the other ends that it's a mechanical thing for them to learn traditional grip. It is not difficult for them at all. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because they've been exposed to that information. But again, I teach my students traditional grip because I want to prepare my students for that particular area should they decide to go into WGI or DCI. I don't want them to be at a disadvantage. And also, I know how to teach that, and I have people that know how to teach that. So at the end of the day, when it comes down to, do you teach bells first? Do you teach snare first? Do you do this? Do you do that? From what I hear, I don't know if this is true, at Dartmouth High School, where they play match grip, their fifth grade year, they don't do anything except bells. They don't play anything else. All right? Or their sixth grade year or whatever else. And then after that, they do whatever they need to do. Now, they have fabulous keyboard players, battery, marching, whatever. Like, they're amazing. They do it that way. So at the end of the day, I say teach it the way that you can teach it. You do it the way that you can do it. If your kids sound great, your kids sound great. But I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all to say that some people are doing a better job because they are teaching match, or some people are doing a less of a job because they're teaching their kids to play traditional.
I think it comes down to two, like what your base level of your kids are. Like, because I see marching bands up here in Ohio that I see guys that are like, we have to do traditional grip because it's marching band. Meanwhile, I'm not like, their kids can't play double strokes. And I'm not talking about like their right hand plays double strokes and their left hand can't do it. I'm talking like neither hand can do it. So they're like, there's gotta be a little bit of like, if you don't have like a solid foundation, if you don't have the cement poured, you ain't building a mansion. You gotta have that support there. So, I think it goes to the instructors too. Like, yeah, you know how to do this. Okay. Like traditional grip, you know how to turn your hand and do that. but do your kids know how to do this? Like, we don't have to look at drum corps and be like, well, they do it, and so we have to do it. There is no, to Rob's point, what he was kind of making, just teach it the way that you teach it. My school is one of those match grip schools, but that's because our kids are still learning how to play real good double strokes. Will we one day change? Maybe, if we get the staff member that can like get them excited about it. I play mediocre traditional grip. No kid's getting excited over watching me play traditional grip. But I have kids that want to learn it. So to E's point too, it's like, okay, we don't have that in our program yet. Or who knows if ever, but yet. But there are people out there that can teach you that right now if you're interested in it. Then it comes down to the question of, not does the kid want to be specialized, is the kid willing to do what it takes to be specialized? Because, like, I could sit here and say, I'm a marching snare drummer. And that would be a load of BS. Like, yes, I can put a stick in my hand and hit a marching snare drum. I can play some good 8/8/16. But if you put me by Elanders and Robert, they will embarrass me. So I ain't a marching snare drummer. And I'm not going to claim to be one. So I think we got to look at realistically what we can do too as teachers and as our program coordinators for our percussion program, in terms of that. But I want to bring up one other point too that makes it hard sometimes for kids to specialize in the program, is like, you got to look at what we're doing in class. Like for me, I pull kids out of band class, and I pull anywhere from 8 to 10 kids out of their band class. Well, if I got 8 to 10 kids specializing in things, I don't have the facilities to go, all right, this is the marimba specialty room, this is the timpani specialty room, and this is the snare drum specialty room, and there's only one of me, so today some of you might get ignored. Like, I don't have that possibility. So you also got to look at that aspect of the program. I think specialization is fine if the kids are doing it on their own time, through lessons, through independent studies, through like watching it on YouTube University, that kind of stuff. And then getting some refinement, again, going, hey, I learned this thing, I was watching YouTube, kind of learned this thing, like, can you help me with it? I'm always down to help a kid with that. But like, if you're trying to specialize on something, on only what we're doing in class, I don't know of a kid in the world that could do that at the high school level, that could specialize something based on only spending 40 minutes a day on it. And again, it's not like we're doing snare drum every day. It's not like we're doing keyboard every day. Like, sometime this week is like, right now we're pounding, it's rudiment time. So it's drum pad day. So the kids that want to get better at 4 mallets, like, your lateral strokes will get better as we're working on these rudiments. But we're not pulling 4 mallets out because we just got done with marching band and you played mediocre 4 mallets, and now we're going to learn how to play drums so we can play great rhythms, and then learn how to play 4 mallets with great rhythm. So those are just some things I think as percussion directors that we got to keep in mind. Like, we have limitations too. It's not just, does a kid want to be a specialty performer? Can we facilitate that?
What about, so I think what's also hard about this topic is it's so broad. And I think we've done a really good job, at least the best we can so far in the time that we've had, to hit multiple aspects of specialization. So I'm going to throw out another question on this big topic in regarding to marching arts. What happens if a kid just wants to do marching band, battery? What happens when marching band's done? Are you going to require them to be in the concert percussion ensemble or concert band stuff? Or are you going to challenge them to learn the keyboard and the triangle? Or are you going to let them specialize in whatever battery instrument they were doing?
I thought about that when you were talking earlier, John, and it was something you said that made me think about the term opt-out. Like, do we have the facility to let students opt out? Or are we holding them hostage for the concert group so that we have the numbers that we need?
Is band going to be a year-round thing, or is it going to be marching band and then bye-bye?
Right. And I know that there are some programs that have the ability to functionally produce a marching band and still have enough left over for the kids that only want to do marching arts to still function their concert groups. But I know where the place that I grew up, if none of our marching players played in the concert group, we'd have nobody. Like there just wasn't enough to go around. So the requirement was you have to be enrolled in the class in order to participate in the marching band. But of course, being enrolled in the class caused you to get better at everything else. You know what I mean? So like
Right.
that is the question is do you have the personnel and resources to do that? And if not, do you still let it be an option? Or do you do something to where it opens up to more of the student body to be in the opt-out group, which is the marching arts, to where once the marching arts is done, they can go do something else, but we have enough core instrumentalists to still function the concert groups.
Yeah, I don't think that usually happens very often unless there's a lot of music education that's invested up front. The only schools that I can think of that I've ever heard where those kids are separate, where the marching arts kids and the concert band kids are separate, are certain California schools and other schools that are that large to where the kids that do marching band and indoor drum line are completely different kids from the kids that are in class because the school is so large. But I would say for the majority, the overwhelming majority of percussion instructors and band programs, that's not the case. And also, the majority of those students that might decide or want to opt out, like you said, they don't have the music education on the front end to allow them to excel in the marching arts without being in class and getting that basic skill set foundation. You know what I mean? Like if there's a kid that's been doing drums and marching band, indoor drum line, and just band class from 6th through 8th grade, and they had a great understanding, then that kid probably could make it in a high school program only doing marching stuff because they already had such a good foundation. But most kids don't have that much performance experience or that much musical foundation to be able to survive on their own without someone continuing to develop them in class. Because to me, regardless of where the talent is or anything else, like class is the equalizer. Class is where you can bring your top player and this player and get your program more aligned. But from what I've seen, any program where students are just marching band and then they opt out, most times, unless they have the numbers to do that, and I would probably say even if they do have the numbers to do that, there's a very large skill gap between the best player and the worst player, which still handicaps the group regardless when you come back around the marching season again.
I'm wondering, should we open up the marching arts to more students in hopes that it will engage them in, you know, things going forward? And when I say open up, I'm meaning they're able to participate in the marching arts. I'm a freshman coming into high school, just like any other thing. I see marching band as an extracurricular. Can I be in the marching band and learn a new skill without having to be a musician in the class?
See, that's the issue my band's having right now, because everyone wants to be a part of the marching band because of the fun and etc.
Right.
But when push comes to shove and you want to get to that either competitive aspect or you actually just want to raise the bar musically and visually, kids don't like to be pushed. More often than not, especially if the status quo has been mediocre at best, right? And they're there just to hang out with friends and do stand tunes over and over again. And then many of the kids after marching band, especially before I came in, and even still a little bit now, but COVID's kind of helped with that. I mean, they would just quit because they didn't have to be in the class. The director would just be like, all right, come in. If you can play your stuff, then you can go do your work or go take care of family matters. You don't have to come to rehearsal. You don't even have to be in the class. But how can you build a consistent music program if kids are only in the marching band and then they leave? Like, you're missing out on ensemble skills, you're missing out on repertoire and music styles that they would not learn because you're just doing the same marching band show over and over again. Um, so I don't honestly I don't remember what question you asked, but I just know that there are a lot of issues when students just do marching band and then quit.
I'm asking, is it an option for us to get more students engaged in music to open it up to like any incoming freshman?
It's an
Hey,
option. It's an option, but by having that option, you're opening up the floodgates to all the other kids saying, "Well, if that kid doesn't have to be in band, why do I have to be in band?" And then you
Right.
got a whole coup on your hands, and then everyone's pissed off,
like
and
a
then
riot.
Talk about it, John.
oh my word.
Well,
Like
not
a
not
riot's about
But
to
look,
start.
nah,
Now,
go ahead,
I
Ryan.
think in some aspect maybe like the color guard, if you don't have a competitive winter
Mhm.
guard and in those
Right.
aspects, then sure. And maybe the electronic system in your pit. But overall, I would say you have to be in the class and you have to be both in the marching band and the concert ensembles year round. Otherwise, I mean, high school is different than college. So,
Right.
sorry.
Well, and I was going to add that as soon as we open that floodgates to, um, do we just let kids do marching band and opt out of concert band? At what point does, because a lot of administrators equate numbers to success, not in terms of like my band scored this, but we have 200 kids in the band, we have 300 kids in the band. At what point do they look at it and go, well, we got 250 in the marching band and 20 in the concert band? Do we just nix the class during the day, which then gets rid of a full-time teacher or full-time staff, and then we lose that program, and then those band directors leave that program because now they're trying to live off a marching band stipend, which we all know doesn't pay jack. How many music programs do we lose at that point? And then the question is, are we really opening it up to more students, or are we closing it off to educators? Because also, you've got to think, like, what happens if all your best kids are like marching band, and then you got the kids that are like, I love music, but I walk into doors when I'm not paying attention, and that kind of stuff. Like, so.
Lord bless their heart, because we still want them in the program, even if
Correct.
the shoes are tied wrong some days.
Correct. But what happens when we get a concert band full of those kids? Because they're the ones that
Fair.
like band,
Ooh.
but don't want to just do marching band and that kind of stuff. So I think you open it up to more kids, but does it also create more problems to do that? And maybe maybe California is the case study, and you see that. But again, how many schools are that large across the rest of the country?
Correct.
Yeah.
Because I don't. Here's my thing with that. I don't think that it's the majority of the students that will want to do that. They don't have the prerequisite knowledge to be able to do that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the prerequisite musical knowledge to be able to function in marching band, having never had any musical experience at all or little to none. So the marching band experience is going to be pretty boring to them because they can't really do anything because they don't have any skills. You know what I mean? It's like, well, how much would you enjoy a pickup game of basketball? Well, I can't do any layups, can't do a bounce pass, never shot a free throw. It's probably going to be pretty miserable. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
you don't have the skills to even enjoy it. So I think, yes, it's good to open it up to the general public or to the student body as something for them to join, but I feel like class is a must because that's where, again, they can learn the skills so that they can actually enjoy it. I will admit I am a marching band kid that learned to love concert stuff.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, I was not a kid that was like, oh, I want to be in band so I can, play xylophone and this, that, and what. Like, I was just not that kid. I mean, so much. And so all the classical pieces that I know, I learned them from marching shows.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it was
It's a
like, oh, it's
gateway
not.
into the concert. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it's not Adagio for strings. It's 2000 Vanguard. Like, that's what I know it as. Like, that just is what it is. So, I mean, I think that that's a good thing for those kids that maybe they have a musical background, but they don't necessarily have all of those prerequisites that we just talked about. But I feel like class is very, very, very important for those kids so that they can begin to enjoy it instead of like the only thing you can play is 5 notes. You know what I mean? And you can play maybe 2 or 3 stand tunes.
And also, don't forget that if you just do marching band, then they're going to take a 6-month hiatus and they'll forget everything musically and visually marching speaking. You got to start all over. Like, their skills will not be progressing.
Yes.
I'd hate to keep adding to this fire because I feel like we could do this all night. One thing I'd say is based on the comments that it really justifies for me why we have color guard classes, which is them continuing to learn new dance skills, new, visual elements and stuff like that. Like, that's important. You know what I mean? For them to continue to increase their knowledge outside of what because I know for a lot of programs, you get the students in through the marching band, but then you have them take the dance class, and that just continues to build their knowledge and skill set, their repertoire, if you will. The other thing that I was going to throw on there is like, okay, if we did open this hypothetical up to students coming in through the marching band, what if we had them take a required amount of private lessons to be able to be a part? And to say, okay, if you're going to qualify for the marching band for next season, then you have to take this number of lessons per month throughout the fall and then throughout the spring until marching band rolls around. Would that be acceptable enough without keeping them in the actual classroom?
Who's paying for the lessons?
Thank you. Class is cheaper. Class dues are cheaper. You have access to more instruments. Hopefully you have access to better instruction or consistent instruction. Like, the pros definitely outweigh the cons in this regard.
You could say, well, if they were really motivated and they wanted to do it, they'll take the lessons. But I know many kids who are motivated and want to do it, but financially it's just not feasible. Now, the band boosters do offer a 50-50 lesson in which they'll pay 50% of your lessons and you'll pay the other 50%. And I also know that some band boosters also have scholarship to sponsor a student. They'll ask businesses or other families to help out. But that takes a lot of work if you have a well-organized band booster program. What happens about our small bands that people forget about? Remember how you talked to your PASIC buddies and you were asking all the, what was it, WGI Con and whatnot?
Yeah. What about the smaller programs? Yeah, and I'm thinking
there's no perfect system.
I know there's not a perfect system, and I'm thinking way outside of the box on all this stuff, but I love to introduce it because it's things that, we're changing the conversation here. We're staying true to our mission, you know what I mean? So yes, all the cons for opening it up and then having them take lessons are definitely outweighed from the pros in regards to cost, right? I don't want to say but
think about the student. This is
the only thing that I will bring up as a counter argument to that is all of the private sports leagues that exist, whether it's a para league for basketball, para league for soccer, you know what I mean? Like, these
I
are
agree.
still things that students pay for that is outside of the school curriculum, but allows them to continue playing in the interim between seasons. So if they have it with sports, why is it not something we could do on the music? See what I did there?
Because
On the music side.
I
Because
think one. Go
by
ahead, Ryan.
by and large, and this is going to sound kind of, I don't know if this is going to sound kind of crappy, but I'll be honest, in my experience, the athletes are more dedicated to their craft than the musicians are. The average one.
And okay, sorry. No, I will jump in. And because if they don't show up, then their coaches are going to bench their butt. Whereas with musicians, everyone is extremely
Everybody gets
important
to
and
play.
valuable, and it doesn't matter if you suck or not because we need you on that field.
But I also think it's easier for athletes to do that because there's a dollar sign readily attached to that. You know what I mean? Like there's a culture around that stuff because that can be very easily monetized. Even sucky football teams are going to sell out their stadiums and somebody's going to come in there and buy some concessions and watch the games and all of that. You know what I mean? So there's more culture, there's more financial incentive behind that for kids to play little league basketball, to play little league soccer, travel soccer, football, whatever. And it's crazy because of the fact that these parents know their kids ain't going to be the next David Beckham. They not going to be the next Messi. They not going to be any of these things. But they will spend the money to put their kids on a travel soccer team because even that seems less of a pipe dream than being a professional musician. You know what I mean? So I think that that's part of it too. There's a culture around that because it's so much more visible. So you probably have those pockets where people invest into that. Like you have some of those BOA schools that are super small in these little podunk areas, but the band's like 300 people. Well, somebody had to build that culture in that place because that's not the norm everywhere where sports dominate everything.
And the visibility that you brought up, Rob, is a huge point because you can turn the TV on and every 5, 6, 7, 8 channels, you're going to see a sports game, or any point in time you can watch sports happening live. You can go to ESPN and watch reruns of sports. You can watch reruns of these things. Like, when was the last time you saw a symphony orchestra concert on cable TV? Never. So I mean, how many parents are unaware that is even an option? How many parents are unaware that you can make a livable wage as a orchestra musician? Now, there's not a lot of those jobs, but in the same token, you can go play, if you don't make the NFL, you can play in the CFL and still make a close to livable wage. If you don't make the NBA, you can go play over in Europe and still make a livable wage. If you don't make it as a professional musician, it's not impossible, but there's no minor league. There's figure out another path, whether it be private lessons or, arranging
gigs.
or writing. Yeah, there's more, like you got to piece and part a million different things together, whereas, I didn't make the NBA, I'll just go play in the G League, or I'll play over in Europe, or I'll go play somewhere else, or, I didn't make the NFL, whatever. I didn't make the Europe soccer league, so I'll go play in America. That kind of stuff.
Shots.
So, I mean, there's more options on the sports side of things. And then, as we said, like, nobody wants to watch their kid ride the bench if they're in an activity. And music doesn't, we put every kid out there. Good, bad, or ugly. Every kid is contributing.
Which I feel like is also sometimes to our detriment.
Problematic.
That we put every kid out there.
Yeah.
And because we accept every kid, there's less of an appreciation for your kid being able to play. You know what I mean? I feel like it happens sometimes with the battery and the front ensemble too. You know what I mean? It's like kids want to be in the battery because it seems like this exclusive thing that you have to audition for, and people get just reassigned to the front ensemble, and hurt wind players and people that showed up late at band camp, they can wind up on the rack on the end,
I like the
no
rack.
problem. I hate racks. I'm on a mission.
I wonder if we flipped that and we said, you know what?
I'm trying
Because
to
you're
get rid
late,
of 'em.
now you get to play bass drum. If kids were just like, oh,
The
God.
biggest bass drum.
Right,
no,
30
but-
inches. Why? Like,
That's
well,
it. I'm telling
next
you,
year you'll
kids-
be on time.
That's it.
That's-
Kids will be like, you know what? Forget this. I'm auditioning for the front ensemble. I don't want to be in the battery. That's for all the dumb kids.
Right.
I want to be in the front ensemble.
You get to carry weights for the next 6 months. Enjoy it.
That's why everyone should go buy a 30 and a 32-inch bass drum, just to put it on a kid, and the kid to be like, nope.
Nope.
No, they can't even lift it up. They just fall down.
I'm
Hey,
good.
oh!
I'm good. Whew. We brought up a lot
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, we did.
So what is everyone's final decision, specialize or not? Rob, you said yes to specialization.
Given that there's a base knowledge of percussion, yes.
Ryan,
I think it depends on the definitions that we've all kicked around of what is specialization and what is basic knowledge, but my by and large answer would be no.
Elanders,
I think that specialization needs to happen outside of the classroom. And I think that, there needs to be, I think there's too much to do from a competency standpoint in the classroom to focus on specialization.
my
That's
answer is
what
I don't care. Do what you want. All right, have a good night.
So,
I'm
yeah.
just kidding. No,
So
my answer.
I'm almost kind of on Ryan's thing. Like, by and large, it's probably no, but it's all situational.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's very situational depending on your program size, your amount of personnel that's helping teach, the background of your students. There's just so many different things. So it's a hard topic to say yes or no, and also because of the age. Are we talking middle school specialization, high school, or college? And I think we addressed that already in tonight's topic.
I don't think we really went into college, but I think, like, for one thing with college, like, it's way easier to specialize in college than all the other facets.
Correct. Because, I would assume that the higher you go up any educational ladder, you step into a specialty in some way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because you mastered the basic knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, to add to what you just said, I don't work on special things, or I wouldn't say that you should work on specialized things in class ever, though.
Okay.
Like, I'm not going to teach. For me,
Rob a
even
believer.
Well, I would counter argue that.
I'm just clarifying. Personally, even though I stand by traditional grip, and I will never have a student play match grip on a marching snare drum, I thought about it this year because I had a group that was like, whew, Jesus, okay, Mark of the Beast. Like, let me get ready for the world to blow up here. But in class, I'm never going to teach anything other than match grip because it's class. That's just the way that it is. Now, marching band, all that kind of stuff, yes, we're gonna play traditional grip. If you want to be on snare drum, you better learn how to turn your left hand. If not, you will not be on snare drum and in one of my groups. But for class, definitely no specialization in class. Just saying.
See, but for me though, I specialize in class because going back to what Ryan talked about earlier, like my kids, because my school is a CTE program, I'm just lucky if I get kids, and I try my best to get kids on specific periods based on level. But if their major conflicts, because no one cares about the fine arts at my school, they're going to go to the major. So I have a beginner in my period 5. I have another beginner who came in 6 weeks late because of COVID, and I got an intermediate student. So I have each student in a different practice room, and I'm going every 5-10 minutes just switching rooms, and they are each specializing on different things because I can't teach them all the same concept at the same time because I got 3 different levels. So it depends on what's happening in your class and what your situation. That's why this topic is so hard.
You're exactly right, which is another topic for another day. Is how people are running their percussion classes when you got that big skill gap. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think in the earlier part of my teaching career, I was more in favor of a percussion class. But now, the older that I get, I'm more in favor of doing pullouts in a band class because the skill gaps are a little bit smaller. Whereas in a percussion class, I got 30 kids in there. I might have 5 of them that are extremely bored because they just, I can't give them all the upper level knowledge and attention that they need because I got to teach to the bottom of the room and bring the program up.
Yeah, that is a topic for another time because I would want to know, do you audition those students before you get them separated into class? And I've done both.
Yes.
To where you do auditions prior to, and then you do auditions, and then you try to work with schedule changes. And the schedule change ones that I've seen have always turned out bad because I've never been able to get like all my symphonic band kids in symphonic band. It's like, okay, well, you're just gonna have to be in concert band during the day, and then you'll do symphonic band at the after school rehearsal. I'm like, oh god, this is a nightmare. Like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll be a
We'll
topic for another time. This has been a great topic. I hope everybody finds some benefit in listening. If not, just some joyous conversation and some things to think on in yourself, which is one thing that we pride ourselves on. So if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, feel free to look us up on Instagram. You can find us at our handle at Volta Percussion, yes. Or you can send us an email if you'd like to send us some topics or you'd like to further discuss the topic that we just addressed, voltapercussion@gmail.com. So I don't have anything else. I'm always so thankful to be in company with the people that are here on this podcast because y'all always bring some great takes. Why are you making that face, John?
The
Just
people
searching for words.
that when we join together, those that are on the call, that are the humans that are.
I couldn't find a better way to say it. The Homo sapiens that are present, that live and procreate on this earth. Like, what? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I am Elanders Frazier. I've also got Mr. Ryan Reed, Mr. Robert Dickens Jr., and Mr. John Gaal.
I'm
We
John
hope that
Gaal.
y'all enjoyed this podcast. We'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.
Peace.
See ya.
See ya.